Hi, friends. I am Marion Woods, founder of Life Above Foundation, your host, a professional counselor, family and marriage therapist, and a wholeness life coach. Welcome to Relationship Real Talk, the podcast where we dive deep and tackle the toughest relationship challenges Christians face today. Are you tired of struggling with unforgiveness, past wounds, and conflicts? Feeling lonely or having trouble communicating? Wrestling with trust issues or trying to balance your faith with your relationship goals? Feeling stuck and stagnant in your relationship? You are in the right place. Here at the Relationship Real Talk, we get real and cover a wide range of topics, including relationship anxiety, trauma bonds, infidelity, estrangement, toxic dynamics, dating after divorce, and how to heal from relationship trauma and grow and build healthy and lasting relationships. We're not just about identifying the problems. We're all about finding real, integrated solutions from multiple disciplines and offering professional help from different fields to mend and strengthen your relationships. So, let's get started on this journey together, one honest, heartfelt conversation at a time. Welcome to today's episode. I'm your host, Marion Woods. Today with me is Marion Knell. Marion Knell, she is a leader on the leadership of Member Care Europe and Global Member Care. She now consults with the European Freedom Network and the Refugee Highway Partnership on care for refugees, refugee workers, and the mental health of refugee children. She has developed and recorded a course for workers and churches on working with traumatized refugees and sustaining refugee workers, which has received CPD certificate. She teaches regularly with Christian Medical Fellowship and is currently delivering a course into Ukraine on receiving soldiers back from war. Welcome, Marion.
Thank you, Marie. It's good to be with you again.
Thank you for taking this time. I know you're from England, so which we have very different time zone. And today your topic is about understanding trauma, PTSD, and the relationship, the roadmap through crisis. Marion, from your mission, your work, tell us, why is this topic?
Well, I first came across it some years ago when we were looking at people who had come out of crisis situations in missions. But more recently, I've been involved, as you said, with Ukraine. So about 10 years ago, I taught for 3 years running as a guest lecturer in Ukraine. So I really came to love the country and its people. And I was involved in summit meetings in Krakow 2 months after the second invasion started. And then I met some Ukrainian pastors, a lady working with refugee trauma or child trauma before the war. And it was an unprecedented situation for most of it, us. And several of the people who were there were involved pastorally. The Poles had 2 million Ukrainians in their country and not really knowing what to do with them. And fast forward to this January, and I got a call from people Kiev. I got a call from Kiev to say, could I go there to teach on how to receive soldiers back from war, because everybody was struggling with it, families, churches. And we both decided, my husband and I, that perhaps going there wasn't the most sensible or effective thing to do, but we would do a Zoom course. So with a colleague from Operation Mobilization, OM, if you know it, we designed a course. I taught it between April and May, and now 3/4 of the way through teaching it again. And it was amazing, the feedback we got from the first course, because we had military chaplains, nurses, teachers, doctors, churches, widows, all of whom had been severely affected by this, or were dealing with people who had been severely affected, and really wanting some tools and things on how can we deal with it. And the amazing thing was, we did post-traumatic growth as the 6th one in the series. And finally, there was some hope for them. Finally, they saw this wasn't all doom and gloom, But if they could be helped to handle their relationships properly and be given some tools, then actually there was a possibility of not just surviving, but growing.
That's a really good point. Not just surviving, but growing.
Yeah.
I know you are the expert in this area about, care for refugees. People have been traumatized, especially in the third world or the country such as Ukraine, as you mentioned about. And I really admire your work, Marianne, by the way. So you are a hero to me, and you have taught us so much in our past events and conferences. So I am curious and want to dive into the conversation with you. So help our audience to understand trauma and the PTSD and go from there. Then we are going to talk about how those affect their relationships and loved ones.
Okay. So if, again, extrapolating from the Ukraine side of things, what we were doing was understanding what the soldier is undergoing in the realms of trauma and PTSD, because, of course, for them, when they leave the front line, they're still in a traumatic situation, and how that impacted their relationships with their spouses, their children, and understanding the possibility of future and hope. And for the chaplains particularly, it was important for them to understand the effects of the trauma on themselves. So as we think about trauma, I just want to start off with a pathway, if you like, to share you a roadmap. We've called this about a roadmap through crisis. And if you can imagine, if our readers can imagine, two hills, two tops of cliff with a sheer drop down to the middle or to a valley. And those three places are called pre-crisis, the left cliff. The bottom of the cliff is crisis, and up to the right of it is post-crisis. So that's the map we're going to follow. So at pre-crisis, we're looking at what happens when what is the impact of a crisis, what is going on while the crisis is happening around with you, and what are the possibilities post-crisis, and what are the possibilities going through. Sorry, I'm getting echoes back, which is not helping. So trauma, for a start, it's important that people understand that trauma is something that is a severe emotional shock and pain caused by an extreme experience outside the normal realm of human experience, which causes psychological or physical injury. One of our problems, I think, when we're dealing with this, those of us in the West, is that we use the word trauma terribly lightly. We say, oh, I had a traumatic day. The cat was sick, the washing machine broke down, and the bus and my car wouldn't start. And it's really debasing the word. So I think we need to put ourselves into the place where we understand that trauma is much more severe and it is life-changing. I've just finished watching a documentary, actually, from Ukraine on Klitschko, and just seeing some of the children's responses to what they've seen and what they've experienced, something that no child should ever have to go through. So we're looking at the pre-crisis really today. We want to understand what was life like before the crisis, because as we talk about relationships where people had healthy family relationships, supportive social relationships before the trauma, they are better equipped to process it and to be restored. People that already had problems, those were just exacerbated by a crisis coming on. And of course, not all crisis causes trauma. So crisis is a temporary state of upset and disorganization. Your life is thrown into disorder. Tedeschi and Kalhunu did a lot of the study on PTG, talk about an earthquake happening. So not cliffs, but an earthquake that disturbs everything. And at that moment when it happens, it's characterized by an individual's inability to cope with a particular situation using their usual methods of problem solving because it's outside of their experience. So there's a possibility for a negative outcome, or as we've seen, a radically positive outcome, which most people don't even entertain the thought of that. And it's immensely encouraging when they do. So you've got the event and the reaction and ability to cope. That's your crisis situation. And as we look at our diagram, that impact, the immediate impact, is followed by disorganization. That's going down the left-hand cliff. And what does disintegration look like? Well, there are three things really. There's shattered assumptions. The goodness of the world is completely destroyed. A belief in the goodness of the world, in life's meaning, a sense of self-worth, trust, a belief in goodness and truth are essential to healthy relationships. So relationships are shattered by the shattered assumptions, because particularly if the trauma is human induced. If it's been a natural disaster, an earthquake, a tsunami or something, that's something nobody controlled. But if it was perpetrated by another human, in other words, burglary, death, rape, then your trust in humankind is shattered. And that inevitably affects your relationships. So Janoff Bullman said this: psychologically, the shattering of fundamental assumptions produces a state of both loss and disintegration. The known, comforting, old, assumptive world is gone, and a new one must be constructed. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. As you were talking about this organization, that I came to, the words that came to my mind is disoriented. It's something take the person out of ordinary, out of something they're familiar with, and it's disordered, disoriented, and disorganized, as you were talking about. And the loss you were talking about, the loss of trust, the loss of self-worth, the loss of view of the world. So many, losses the person has to deal with.
That was exactly what I was going to move on to, was loss. Yes. You beat me to it. You beat me to it. Yeah. So you've got our shattered assumptions, and then that constitutes then a huge amount of losses. Sometimes sudden loss of people through death. In war situation, places are destroyed. Loss of the future, what you saw as the future and your future hope is gone. And loss of goodbyes because of everything happening so suddenly. Often you haven't had the chance to do goodbyes. And all of those losses, people, places, future, goodbyes, are related to relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that we'll look at later on that's really important for people who are in this situation is the ability to grieve, and to grieve healthily.
Mm-hmm.
So as we explore this over the next couple of sessions, we'll see that how you process everything that's happened to you in trauma is really, really crucial. And so often, well, I suppose British are known for their stiff upper lip, aren't they? We're told to just get on with it, get on with life. And unfortunately, Christians are sometimes like that. Somebody quotes a Bible verse at you and you say, we're just got to get over it. God works together for good in everything. And that's not a healthy.
We both know that doesn't work.
We both know that doesn't work. It's true, but it's not helpful in this situation.
Right.
So we've got shattered assumptions on this slope, loss and disillusionment. That really is what takes you down into the pit. where you think that nothing's going to change. I am stuck here. You know, this is in a sense who defines me now. In other words, it impacts our relationships with ourselves, because this is now, I am now the victim of this trauma that's been perpetrated. So there's no hope for the future. The past idea of safety is false. I thought I was safe. Well, that's just not true. Christian assurances are often false. And so it's also linked to our spiritual relationships. Once we get down there, it impacts our relationship with God, because who is he now? He isn't who I thought he was. Where is he in this situation? So spiritual disillusionment sometimes goes along. And of course, as soon as your relationship with God is affected, that's a roll on to everything else.
So true.
Does that,
yeah,
that makes sense, does it?
Yes,
So,
I definitely make sense. The trauma hit when the trauma hits, and it affects every aspect of the person's life, as you mentioned about psychologically, spiritually, socially, mentally, emotionally. Oh my gosh. So thank you so much, Marianne, to help us unfold and to see the pattern when what before the crisis and during the crisis when it happened. You were talking about the disorganization, and now from there, when the person goes through trials, as Christians, we go through life in this world, we will face trials or difficulties and tribulations. And so in this process, the person felt huge, the losses in the different, the belonging, the feeling of belonging to a community, to a society, that lost. And the loss of their identity. Who am I without this community, without my family around it?
Yes. And I think it's really important that if we're going to have the loss of trust, yes. If we're going to help someone who's in this situation and we want the best for them, we want that moving, we have to be able to walk in their shoes, sit in their seats, and understand what it's like for them, because it's all very well to say, I feel for you, but you're not there. So we have to see why their perspectives have changed, because we're looking at it objectively, they're looking at it subjectively. But we can't, I think the other little warning to put in here is that we can't come so close that to them that their pain becomes ours. And so we mirror their experience rather than help them to process. Somebody once said to me, it's important to be affected by another's pain, but not to be infected. Because then we're into the realms of vicarious trauma. So as we talk about moving someone towards post-traumatic growth, if we're the helper, as well as understanding, we also have to understand our role and the effects that this will have on us. Because
so let me just pause you for a second.
Yes.
Talking about it's okay to be affected, but
yes,
not impacted.
No, infected.
Infected. Oh,
yes, like a disease. You can be affected. In other words, you empathize. You sympathize
of the person,
for the pain, but you don't become infected. You don't take it. There's not this sort of transference and counter-transference happening. We don't take it inside. We have to be able to, well, the only place for the pain is at the cross, but we have to guard.
So you're saying don't take it as personal. Don't personalize it.
Yes. Yeah, okay. I think that's important, because actually then you cease to be helpful to the person. And of course, working with someone who's undergoing trauma, and particularly PTSD, which is obviously, so trauma can be short and sharp. PTSD is when the symptoms go on for at least 6 months afterwards, or some people say 3 months, you know, and that knowing the symptoms of trauma, you know, the flashbacks, nightmares, all of this sort of thing. If it's prolonged, then we are talking about PTSD. But just being aware of our role and protecting not just ourselves, but the people that we're with, because you build a relationship with somebody if you're walking through with them.
So again, remind our audience if you're listening right now. So our topic today is about understanding trauma, PTSD, and the relationship. Here our speaker, Marianne, she's giving us a roadmap through the crisis people been through. And through her background of working with multiple refugees from different nations and countries, she has expertise and understanding of how to work with people who have been through traumas. So Marianne, we're talking about this crisis in a very particular situation, people being through really horrific trauma that has separated them from their country, from their loved ones, from their community, right? So you also mentioned about the relationship, that the relationship, we're focusing on caregivers, how to work with those traumatized people as a professionals, caregivers, or church leaders, or just genuinely speaking that you are the person desire to care for refugees, or in general, people are suffering from a trauma.
Indeed. And as I say, for me, it's come outside of refugees having got involved with the military, but then you become aware of people in your own community who have had a trauma that has seriously affected them and continues to affect them. So the PTSD, those who've experienced or witnessed a traumatic event, remember that witnessing it can actually cause it, as well as being the victim of it, causes a psychiatric disorder which intrudes in them. And post-traumatic growth, which is where we're heading in the chart, is all about restoration. And to restore something, you have to look at what it was going on before, process where they've got to, and then walk up the hill of restoration with them. And again, the studies have shown that both in PTG and in burnout, if you've done anything on burnout, that healthy family relationships, supported social relationships, pre, during, and after, are absolutely critical to working with folk and to helping them process it. I think so. One of the things we're going to talk about later on is what skills can we help the layperson to do when they're into this place, what I call psychological first aid, because most people who are faced with this, they're not professional doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, but they want to be helpful. And how can they help safely? How can they help safely for them and for their clients? And part of that is all about building trust within what you're doing, giving them listening skills, because part of the processing is very much a listening. We know that people who've been traumatized don't have a sequential memory. They can't always remember that things happened this, then this, then this. They remember it in pieces, piecemeal. I have found this certainly within the refugee community, that some people have said, oh, refugees don't tell the truth because they never tell the same story twice. Well, that's because trauma disrupts your cognitive functions. So you need to listen lots of times to get what's out. And training in that listening, training in listening skills, training about debriefing, I think, is another thing that's really helpful too. I don't know if we're straying off the point at the moment, but I think all of these things are important if we're going to actually equip people to this wonderful thing of post-traumatic growth, because what the main proponents of this have said, that PTG, and I'll probably come back to this, is the belief that people can emerge from any traumatic event of life or life crisis with a new worldview of life, a new understanding of the world they live in, new understanding of themselves and how to relate to other people, and the kind of future they might have, and a better understanding of how to live life. They'll be more resilient and feel changed in unexpected and positive ways. And that's enormously encouraging.
Right. I love that definition.
Yeah.
Growth. Yeah.
Well, we'll come back to that probably later when we're talking about the tools.
Yes.
But I think if you offer, I mean, you've got to be very careful how much when you offer that as a possibility in this process. It's no point when people are down at the bottom talking about post-traumatic growth.
Mm-hmm.
There was a study that was done amongst some American veterans, and one of their therapists said therapists should not jump right into the possibility of growth because it can be construed as minimizing someone's pain and suffering and minimizing the impact of the loss.
Yes, yes, definitely. You know, as a therapist, a trauma-informed therapist, when people come to the section, you know, we have to really slow down and work with the person. If they're in the deep valley, like this map you provided, in the deep valley, we have to sit with the person to sympathize and feel the pain of the person, like you mentioned about step into their shoes. And so they will feel being seen and heard and understood.
Yes, indeed. I mean, we have it, of course, in our minds if we understand that PTG is a clinically studied event, that it's possible. So we know there's the possibility, but we don't express it at that time.
Right.
And it was very interesting in this veterans facility that the treatment was primarily led by veterans who themselves had gone through trauma and achieved growth. So there was somehow not just an authenticity in what was happening. And for one of these sessions, we have a veteran who comes and talks for the Ukrainians, who comes and talks about his war experiences. He was in the Gulf War. And he said that when he got home, he couldn't talk to his wife about it. So the relationship was difficult. But the people he could talk to were others who had gone through the same experience.
Yes.
And that's not to say that those of us who haven't gone through the experience can't be helpful. We can. But we always have to realize that there's certain nuances that we won't necessarily get, I think, in the process.
Yes.
So I don't know how do you want us to go on and talk a little bit more about that middle phase, or should we start a new section with that?
Yes, Marianne, and you just paint the map, the picture for us. So could you just summarize the three phases, the roadmap, and paint the whole picture, summarize it for our audience?
Okay, so the roadmap is the from pre-crisis through crisis to post-crisis. And so we've looked at, well, what's the impact of a crisis and what's the impact of trauma, and particularly PTSD, which is prolonged symptoms. And then we looked at the downward slope on the left to where you really get to your bottom of disillusionment. So the disintegration process is shattered assumptions about the goodness of the world, meaning, self-worth, trust, and then multiple losses of people, places, future, goodbyes, relationships. And at the bottom, there's people reach the point of disillusionment where there's hopelessness, nothing's going to change. They have no hope for the future. This is who they are from now on in. This identifies them. And therefore, that affects all their relationships, because they are not now that person that they were. They are now this damaged person, as they would see it. And of course, the other side of this is that you're hopefully, if you can, as we are with the Ukrainians, people are separately working with wives and children to help them understand everything that we've said today, so that they can respond in an appropriate manner, because it will take them a time. Otherwise, we've got women who are, sorry, I'm out of my summary now, but they're expecting almost out of a second honeymoon when the husband comes back from war. And the person who comes back is not the person that went. They are damaged. They are damaged by it, and the relationship has to be rebuilt.
Right.
And so this disillusionment, which may also affect their Christian beliefs as well, and impact on relationships. And then the other two bits of the thing, or the other two we're going through, are going to be looking at what happens in that crisis, how can we help in the crisis, and then what will we be able to do to promote post-traumatic growth and that climb up the hillside, so that somebody becomes a celebrant rather than a victim.
Wow, that's a lot. For as you were talking about Ukraine soldiers, people work on the upper front line. People have eyewitness or experience by the war, the trauma themselves being affected when they return to home, and they're a different person. And
Yeah.
how that affect their loved ones, their family relationship. I can imagine. That's just and you mentioned about to separate the work with the wives or children, other than the husband or father. So because they're in a different situation, right?
Yes, and of course, I mean, this isn't always the case, but in the Ukraine situation, of course, the family, there is no area without trauma. So the wife and child will probably have been through traumatic events whilst the soldier was away. So they're not coming back to a peaceful situation. So there's two different situations. There's a situation where you've got people who are themselves dealing with trauma, taking a severely traumatized person back. But the Marine I talked to, he said it was different for him because he'd been in the war situation. His wife had been living in the States, given birth to their first child. Life was normal. And so that was a very different situation, but she still had to understand where he was coming from or what was going on, and how to deal with memories. And actually, he just one reflection this week, because he did it this last week, and he said he brought back, I think it was a bullet or something as a souvenir of the war, because it was something that, and that just freaked his wife out. She said, I can't have that in my house. Yes, so that sort of conversation needs to be had, and again, the children, their relationships with their parent is damaged, and of course, if they themselves are traumatized, then they're needing somebody to talk to. Who can I talk to? Because traumatized parents can't parent traumatized children. Well, traumatized parents can't really traumatize parent children in general. They can, but not ideally.
Right. Yes.
So it's a much more complicated. If you've got, hopefully, particularly if you've got a church community, this is what I loved about the Ukrainians. It was the churches who reached out help, because we think of our nice little nuclear family bubble for this to happen in. But actually, if we're really serious about this, then the community has to gather around the person who's affected, the family that's affected, in order to support them and give space and enough listeners and enough emotional support
Right.
to facilitate that post-traumatic growth.
That's right. So there's so much depth, so complicated situation that I think this is a very good starter point for our listeners in our episode 1. And Marianne, thank you for explaining this roadmap to crisis to us. And I think this is very practical, very give us a visual. I'm a visual learner, so give us an idea where we are and how to approach to the traumatic, people have been traumatized who suffer from PTSD. And also look into, this relationship podcast, and then we see how this relationship being affected by trauma, PTSD, and how, you just give us the roadmap how to approach traumatized people and between couples and between parents and the children. So there's so much more we can dive in, right? But today I think it is a good end for our first episode, and we will have dive even deeper how to care for our soldiers, veterans, or people being through traumas. And you're mentioning about the church care, and that's a huge, I believe it's the body of Christ, our responsibility for us all to carry for the world, for the wounded, for the traumatized, for the ones, for refugees, for widows, for the ones that has lost a country, lost a home. And it's our responsibility to love and care for them. But now it's a question that going to our second episode, how can we be a better caregiver? How can we do this job in a more effective way to bring glory to God and bring healing to people and bring relationships together again in a healthy way? So thank you for your listening today, and thank you, Marianne, for joining us in this conversation. I hope to talk to you soon. Bye now.
Bye.